Have you ever underestimated someone based on their job or appearance? Maria Jackson, a humble cleaning lady, worked for one of the biggest corporations in the city for 15 long years, meticulously doing her job while being dismissed and overlooked by those around her. But little did they know that her intelligence and determination would change everything. Maria wasn't just cleaning the offices, she was quietly observing everything happening in the company, taking note of details that no one else seemed to see. One day, a single letter would change the fate of the company and turn Maria's life upside down. From being invisible to becoming the one person who could expose a scandal that would rock the very foundation of the corporation, Maria's story is one you don't want to miss. What happens when the cleaning lady knows more than the CEO himself? And how does she end up holding all the power? Before we get into the full story, let us know where in the world you're watching from today. If you enjoy stories of unlikely heroes and powerful transformations, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Now let's dive into this incredible journey of resilience, unexpected power shifts, and the surprising rise of a woman who everyone underestimated. Maria Jackson had worked at one of the biggest corporations in the city for 15 years, doing the same tasks every day, sweeping floors, emptying trash cans, wiping down surfaces, and ensuring the building sparkled before anyone else arrived. She was the first to step through the doors in the early morning, and the last to leave when the night settled in. Her hands were always busy, but her mind was always thinking, observing, and absorbing everything around her. To most of her colleagues, Maria was just the cleaning lady, a familiar face they'd pass without a second glance. The executives, with their sharp suits and brisk walks, barely noticed her presence. She was part of the scenery, like the potted plants or the paintings on the wall, essential yet unnoticed. No one cared to know that she once had dreams beyond this job, that she once held a different career, one that demanded skill and intelligence. They couldn't imagine that beneath the uniform and humble demeanor was a mind sharp enough to understand things they couldn't see. The executives especially seemed to think that just because Maria held a mop, she wasn't capable of anything else. They never wondered about the life behind the quiet smile, the story behind the hands that kept their offices clean. But while they walked past her without a thought, Maria listened. She overheard conversations in the boardrooms during late-night cleanups, read the documents left carelessly on desks, and picked up on whispers in the hallway about changes in the company's direction. She wasn't snooping. Everything she observed was right there in the open, in plain sight. It's just that nobody thought she was paying attention. And why would they? She was just the help. But Maria had a knack for spotting patterns, for connecting the dots. She could see the cracks forming in the company's foundation, the financial missteps the executives thought they had hidden well. And she knew, deep down, that something was terribly wrong. Richard Ellis, the CEO of the corporation, was a man who believed in power, control, and maintaining his iron grip over the company he had built from scratch. To him, the world was divided into those who made decisions and those who followed orders. And as far as he was concerned, Maria belonged to the latter group, a faceless worker who kept the floors clean and the trash bins empty. He barely acknowledged her, if ever. In Richard's mind, he was the reason for the company's success. The numbers always looked good, the profits steady, and he liked to think it was because of his sharp business acumen. He held firm in his belief that he alone knew the ins and outs of the company's operations. But in reality, Richard had distanced himself from the day-to-day workings. He focused on grand expansion plans and future investments, leaving the finer details to the trusted executives under him. He had become blind to the subtle signs of trouble brewing beneath the surface. Maria saw things differently. Her sharp eye for detail and her background as a financial analyst, a past life she rarely spoke about, allowed her to notice discrepancies in the reports she came across while cleaning offices late at night. She'd spot documents with figures that didn't add up, overhear meetings about adjustments to financial reports, and pick up on the tense, whispered conversations between the executives. She knew enough to recognize that the company's financials were a mess, that they were juggling losses and hiding debts. One evening, as she dusted near the executive boardroom, Maria overheard a conversation that confirmed her worst fears. Two senior managers were discussing the upcoming quarterly earnings report, their voices laced with anxiety. They mentioned adjusting the numbers to make the company appear more profitable than it truly was. They spoke of Peter Grant, the chief financial officer, and his role in keeping the losses buried under layers of accounting tricks. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as she processed what she had just heard. This wasn't just mismanagement, this was fraud. And it wasn't just the company's reputation at risk. If this deception continued, the entire company would collapse, dragging down the jobs of hundreds of employees who depended on it. But what could Maria do? Who would listen to a cleaning lady? She knew that if she went to Richard with her concerns, he'd dismiss her without a second thought. Yet staying silent wasn't an option either. She had to act, but she needed a plan, one that would force Richard to see the truth whether he wanted to or not. Maria took a risk. She began writing down everything she had observed, every inconsistency she had uncovered. She detailed the financial missteps, the manipulated reports, and the shady deals she had overheard. Then she typed out an anonymous letter, warning Richard about the financial crisis brewing under his nose. She laid out the major red flags, the discrepancies in the accounts, and the looming disaster. But she was careful. She knew she couldn't reveal everything at once, nor could she expose herself. She needed him to take the warning seriously, to start asking questions. Late one night, after the office had emptied, Maria slipped the letter onto Richard's desk, placing it carefully atop the stack of reports he checked each morning. As she walked out of the building, she hoped that the truth in her words would be enough to wake him up. The next morning, Richard Ellis arrived at the office as he always did, confident, with the air of a man who believed he was in control of everything around him. He settled into his chair, glancing at the pile of reports on his desk. His eyes landed on the unfamiliar envelope placed on top, addressed simply to him with no return name. Frowning, he tore it open and began to read. As he scanned the letter, his face shifted from annoyance to disbelief, and finally to anger. The anonymous writer, whoever they were, had claimed to know of financial discrepancies within his company, alleging that losses were being hidden and numbers manipulated. Richard tossed the letter aside with a dismissive scoff. To him, it was likely the work of a disgruntled employee, or perhaps a rival looking to plant seeds of doubt. Who would dare question his leadership and the integrity of his executives? But as he tried to focus on the reports before him, Richard couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that lingered after reading the letter. He prided himself on his instincts, and something about the precision in those accusations gnawed at him. What if there was a grain of truth in it? Reluctantly, Richard decided to authorize a quiet internal audit, keeping the decision to himself. He didn't want to alarm his executives or the board until he had a better grasp of the situation. If there was something going on, he wanted to be the first to know. As the auditors began their work, Richard continued with his routine, trying to push the letter out of his mind. But each day, the nagging doubt grew stronger, and he found himself paying closer attention to the small details he had once ignored. The internal audit results came back sooner than he expected, and the findings were disturbing. There were unexplained gaps in the financial reports, inflated revenue figures, and entire expenses that seemed to have been buried within obscure accounts. The deeper they dug, the more they uncovered. And soon, the focus of the investigation turned squarely on Peter Grant, the CFO. Peter had been skimming money from the company for years, covering up losses and manipulating the financial records to present a facade of stability and growth. He had orchestrated deals that appeared lucrative on paper, but left the company dangerously exposed. It wasn't just bad business, it was outright fraud. Richard's world spun as he processed the information. He called Peter into his office, his voice tate with barely controlled rage. The confrontation was short, and Peter, cornered by the evidence, tried to deflect blame, insisting that he had only done what was necessary to keep the company afloat. But Richard was done listening to excuses. He fired Peter on the spot, ordering him to leave the premises immediately. As Peter left the building, the weight of the crisis bore down on Richard. He had always believed himself to be the one in control, the visionary leader who could see the future of his company clearer than anyone else. But now he realized how blind he had been. The company he thought was thriving had been rotting from within, and he hadn't even seen it coming. Yet the question that haunted Richard the most was simple. Who had sent that letter? Who had warned him just in time, saving the company from a disaster he hadn't even known was looming? He couldn't let go of the mystery, knowing that whoever it was, they had seen what he couldn't. They had seen the danger while he had been too busy basking in his own self-assuredness. Richard Ellis paced back and forth in his office, mind racing. Peter's departure had left the company in turmoil, and despite his efforts to stabilize things, he knew that a full-blown crisis was still looming. The anonymous letter had saved them from complete ruin, but the uncertainty of who was behind it gnawed at him. Whoever had sent it knew the company's financial details with a precision that couldn't be ignored. As he sat at his desk, staring out of the window at the cityscape, a notification from his assistant appeared on his computer. It was a meeting request from Maria Jackson, the cleaning lady. Richard frowned, confused and irritated. Why would Maria request a meeting with him, and of all times, right now? Part of him wanted to ignore it, but something about the timing piqued his curiosity. He sighed and accepted the meeting, figuring he could afford a brief distraction. And that evening, as the office emptied and the building grew quiet, Maria walked into Richard's office with her usual calm demeanor, a small folder clutched in her hands. She looked around, taking in the opulence of the space she had cleaned for years, but now she was here for a different reason. "Maria," Richard began, trying to hide his impatience, "I agreed to this meeting, but I don't have a lot of time. What can I do for you?" Maria's expression remained steady as she took a seat across from him, setting the folder down on his desk. "I think it's more about what I can do for you, Mr. Ellis," she replied, her tone calm but confident. Richard was taken aback by her directness. He leaned forward, folding his hands together, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Go on." Maria opened the folder, revealing stacks of notes, spreadsheets, and documents that Richard instantly recognized. They were detailed records of the discrepancies that the auditors had uncovered, but there were also more notes, handwritten, precise, highlighting patterns and irregularities that the internal investigation had missed. Richard's eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. This information hadn't come from the audit team. It was Maria's own work. "Where did you get these?" Richard demanded, his voice edged with disbelief. Maria met his gaze steadily. "From you, Mr. Ellis, from your executives, from all the things they left lying around because they thought no one would understand them. I've been watching, listening, and taking notes for months now. I knew something was wrong before you did, and I knew it wouldn't be long before the company fell apart." Richard stared at her, struggling to reconcile the woman sitting before him with the image he had held of her for years. "You sent the letter," he said, the realization hitting him like a punch. Maria nodded. "I did. I couldn't stand by and watch everything collapse when I knew what was happening. But I also knew that if I came forward, no one would take me seriously. So, I chose a different way to make you listen." For a long moment, Richard was silent, his mind reeling. The anonymous letter, the details, the investigation, it all led back to Maria, the cleaning lady he had dismissed as unimportant. He thought of the years he had passed her by without a second glance, and now she was sitting across from him, holding the information that had saved his company from ruin. Maria's voice broke through his thoughts, steady but with an edge of resolve. "I didn't come here to gloat, Mr. Ellis, but I know what's at stake, and I know how to help you put things right. I'm not asking for much, just a chance to use what I know to make this company better. You need someone who understands the numbers, someone who cares about the people who work here. Let me help you." Richard leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he tried to process the situation. The irony of it all was almost too much to bear. The woman he had overlooked for years had not only uncovered the truth but had become the key to saving the company. She was asking for a chance, but the truth was, he needed her more than she needed him. Finally, he met her gaze, seeing her in a new light. "You've got a lot of nerve, Maria, but you've also got the insight we need right now. If you're willing to work with me, I'll make sure you get the opportunity you're asking for. I won't make the mistake of underestimating you again." Maria's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Good. Then let's get to work, Mr. Ellis. We have a lot to fix. As she rose from her seat, Richard extended a hand and Maria shook it firmly. It was a handshake that signaled the start of a new chapter, one where power was no longer determined by position, but by the ability to see the truth when no one else could. Richard Ellis walked through the company's halls the next morning, feeling a mix of resignation and determination. The news of Peter Grant's dismissal and the financial turmoil had rocked the company, but the board was slowly regaining confidence with Maria's insights guiding them. Maria had proven herself more capable than most of the executives, and now she was no longer just the cleaning lady. She was their best chance at steering the company back on track. Maria began her new role in the financial department quietly, but with a focus and determination that didn't go unnoticed. Despite the challenges and the whispers among employees who still couldn't believe that a former cleaner had stepped into a strategic role, Maria stayed committed to her work. She had years of experience, both in corporate finance and in understanding people, and she used it to build bridges within the company. She attended every board meeting, her notes and insights consistently hitting the mark, pointing out weak spots, and suggesting actionable solutions. Maria knew she had to prove herself every day, not only to the board but to the employees who still saw her as the woman who once cleaned their offices. Richard watched this transition with a mix of pride and humility. He knew he had made the right decision in trusting Maria, even if it had been forced upon him. Her ability to see beyond the numbers, to understand the real needs of the company and its people, was precisely what they needed to recover from the crisis. And in Maria, he saw a reminder of the humility and awareness he had lost over the years. As Maria settled into her new responsibilities, she initiated a series of changes that quickly began to transform the company's culture. She focused on transparency, insisting that financial reports be clear and accessible, not just to the board but to employees at all levels. She hosted open meetings where employees could ask questions about the company's direction, creating an atmosphere of trust that had been absent for years. One day, as Maria led a workshop on ethical practices for the senior management team, Richard watched from the back of the room, marveling at the respect she commanded. It was a far cry from the laughter and dismissive comments he had overheard from some of these same managers not long ago. Maria's story had spread throughout the company, how she had uncovered the fraud, how she had forced Richard's hand, and how she had stepped up when no one else would. During a break, Richard approached Maria, who was quietly reviewing her notes. "You've done a lot in a short time," he said, his tone sincere. "More than I could have imagined." Maria looked up, meeting his gaze with a small, appreciative smile. "It's just the beginning, Mr. Ellis. There's still a lot of work to do, but I think we're on the right path." Richard nodded, a newfound respect in his eyes. "You don't have to call me Mr. Ellis anymore, Maria. Call me Richard. After everything, I think we've earned that." She smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "All right, Richard. Let's keep making things right." Months turned into years, and the company that had once been on the brink of collapse flourished under new leadership. Maria's focus on transparency and accountability revitalized the workforce. Employees who had once felt like cogs in a machine now felt valued and heard. Maria's mentorship program became a cornerstone of the company's culture, offering guidance and opportunities for those who, like her, had been underestimated. Richard Ellis officially stepped down as CEO a year after their meeting, handing over the reins to a new leader who embraced the principles Maria had brought to the forefront. He remained on the board as an advisor, but his role was now one of learning and humility rather than control. He often reflected on how close he had come to losing everything and how it had taken a cleaning lady with a sharp mind and a brave heart to save his legacy. As for Maria, she never sought the spotlight, but her story became a symbol of resilience and transformation. Industry leaders sought her advice, and she spoke at conferences about the power of perspective, how listening to those often overlooked could change the course of an entire company. She remained deeply connected to her roots, always reminding herself of the days when she walked these same halls with a mop and bucket, knowing she had so much more to offer. The company became a leader in ethical business practices, and its turnaround was studied as a case of how true leadership and vision could come from the most unexpected places. Maria's influence extended beyond the walls of the office, inspiring change in other companies struggling with similar challenges. Her journey from being dismissed as a cleaning lady to becoming a respected leader was a testament to the power of perseverance, humility, and the courage to speak the truth. One evening, as Maria sat in her new office, a far cry from the janitor's closet where she had once stored her supplies, she received a visit from Richard. He handed her a framed photograph of the company's building, a simple gesture but one that spoke volumes. "Thank you, Maria," Richard said, his voice full of emotion. "For everything. I don't think I ever really told you that." Maria smiled softly, placing the photo on her desk. "You're welcome, Richard. But remember, I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because it was the right thing to do." With that, Richard left her office and Maria sat back, looking at the city lights through her window. She thought about the journey she had taken, the risks she had faced, and the people she had helped along the way. It wasn't an easy path, but it was one she wouldn't trade for anything. She knew that as long as she kept believing in herself and in the power of truth, there was no challenge she couldn't face. Thank you for watching this story of perseverance and redemption. If you found inspiration in Maria's journey, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that show the power of resilience and courage. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know how Maria's story has inspired you. Until next time, keep believing in yourself and those around you, because you never know where the next great leader might come from.